Good morning, friends, and welcome to our 11 a.m. Meeting of the United Lodge of Theosophists for the Washington, D.C. area. Today's speaker will tell us from one of the masterworks of HPB what is unveiled in ISIS Unveiled. Like with all else that HPB transmitted to us, she said that she was merely passing on what she was instructed from the ancient message of the wisdom by the masters of wisdom. So this is the ancient message. Next Sunday's talk is on the meaning of Easter. Next Sunday we will also be continuing our readings and discussions from the Living the Life series. At 12:30 p.m., as we do every Sunday, on Living in Life is next week, but every first and third Sunday we have readings and discussions from selected topics. The ULT is guided by its declaration printed on the back of our program, which is over here. It's here in print. It's also on our website, www.ultdc.org. The declaration says, "The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self. A profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others." And at the end, as a quotation, "The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all." And before we get into today's talk, we have some quotations left to us by HPB, Mr. Judge, and Mr. Crosby. HPB calls our attention to the voice of the silent. The quote here is, "Thou hadst to salute thyself and pure alaya, thou hast to saturate thyself with pure alaya, become as one with nature's soul thought, at one with it thou art invincible. In separation thou becomest the playground of Samvati, origin of all the world's delusions." And Mr. Judge says, "I care not what I was or what anyone was. I only look for what I am each moment. For as each moment is and at once is not, must follow that if we think of the past, we forget the present, and while we forget, the moments fly by us, making more past. And Mr. Crosby gives us one sentence. All things which are visible come from the invisible. And now we'll have today's talk, which is what is unveiled and ISIS unveiled.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. As the first speaker mentioned, we're going to look at HPB's masterworks. It is an undertaking that hasn't been done at this ULT before, but we're going to look into her masterworks, ISIS Unveiled, Secret Doctrine, The Key to Theosophy, and The Voice of the Silence. Why are these her masterworks? Because they are the most influential of her works. For instance, ISIS Unveiled was published in 1877. In 2 weeks, the 10,000 copies that were printed were sold. It has never since been out of print. And it is still influencing thought today. That word masterworks has a double meaning though, because she tells us that the archaic or the wisdom religion, as she called the philosophy, sciences, and religions of old, as a complete philosophical reality is in the safekeeping of the masters. The masters, she for the first time, when she came out into the world, brought it to our attention and said that these wise beings who have reached that stage of development by right has earned the safekeeping of this knowledge. Why is that so? They keep it so that it is not lost, and at its appropriate time, parts of that knowledge is given out to different races in different parts of the world and during different ages. Even though it may be different verbology or language, the basic fundamental principles of the wisdom religion is ever the same. And the masters constitute a brotherhood, and they disseminate this information periodically. But at its base, it's the same. And when that work was published, it was definitely considered a literary effort that was unique. In this book, everything is laid out for us for our examination. Arguments are provided, evidence is given, citations are quoted, and it is left to our judgment to examine the facts, its accuracy, because she quotes it from different sources, and reasonableness. She never expects us to go to anyone else. She says the human soul or the individuality in this age is the judge for himself or herself. We don't need authority. We don't need anyone else to tell us anything. Everything is right there for our examination. And the masters give it so that they don't overwhelm the mind of the age. It is given only in parts. The whole knowledge is so vast because it's inclusive of everything. It cannot be all together given at one time. And in Isis Unveiled, later on, HPB says there are 7 keys to all of nature's wisdom, and all of the keys are never given at the same time. 7. What did she do for us in Isis Unveiled? She gave one of the keys, one key. She turned it one time. One key is given. And she says, the tone of the book is such that it is appealing to the open-minded, the free thinkers. But she's not interested in giving partial information. She wants us to obtain all of the knowledge that could have been given at that time to make our own judgment about it. And she came upon the name Isis on a statue of Isis. There is this statement: I am all that has been, all that is, all that ever shall be, and no mortal has ever lifted my veil. The name of her book was not Isis Unveiled. It was the Veil of Isis. And if you look on the original manuscripts, that's what's written, the Veil of Isis. However, the publisher said there was another book at that time with that same title and convinced her to change the title to Isis Unveiled. Her intention was not to unveil all that this statement here implies, because it says, I am all that has been, all that is, all that ever shall be, and no mortal has ever lifted my veil. So what is she doing? She's perhaps lifting the corner of the veil, and by giving this information to us, leading us to think on these lines to get at the truth. So, in reading this book, we have to be aware that there is a wisdom, collective wisdom, that has always existed from remotest times, and it is a system of thought whose teachings about man and nature is complete. Nothing has been left out. Before we actually go into what has been unveiled, we should ask, why was it written? Why did she feel that it needed to be written? Well, this is 1877, and she started writing it in 1874. And amongst all the other activities that she did, she managed to finish this book. And at that time, what was present? Dogmatic religion and science that is very materialistic. Today it is so too, but it is, in its scope, is broader than it was back then. It was a closed system back then. And there was no philosophy that would augment what she wanted to give to the world. So she wrote it to show its reasonableness, and let's look at it. It says, Isis Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology. Volume 1 deals with science, Volume 2 deals with theology. she's telling us that the underlying value is that she's going to give us all that she could find, because she went and collected this information about science and theology at that time. She gathers all of the fragments that she can get her hands on, and she collates them and publishes in this book form. The aim is for us to see its value. What is the value? Well, when we examine it, as is given, this portion, we find that the information predates and is the basis of all the ancient philosophies, religions, and sciences. And the examination of it gives us an underlying unity and origin. Underlying unity and origin. The fundamental principles of the philosophy are based on that unity. It's the first object of the theosophical movement, brotherhood. Constructing a nucleus of brotherhood is based on this. So she calls this body of wisdom in the keeping of the masters the wisdom religion. And what she gives out to the world in her works, in her books, she names it as theosophy. How was it written? Perhaps should be another question we ask. In 1875, she wrote to Dr. Corson of Cornell University. And I quote from her letter. She says, "The indications are that we are about at the threshold of an epoch when 1,000 mysteries shall be revealed, and it depends at least in some degree upon such very feeble mortal agencies as your pen and mine and those of other zealous workers, how soon the world shall be enlightened." In September, we find HPB at Corson's home in Ithaca, and she's working on Isis. She's writing it. And there is a quotation that Corson's son wrote about HPB, and I quote again. HPB spent her time at her desk, writing most of the day and way into the night. She wrote about 25 closely written pages a day. She had no books to consult. My father's extensive library was almost wholly on English literature, and she rarely consulted him about anything. And Professor Corson makes this statement: "She had a profound knowledge of everything, and her method of work was most unusual. She would quote long verbatim paragraphs from dozens of books, of which I'm perfectly certain there were no copies at that time in America, translating easily from several languages, and occasionally calling to me in my study to know how to turn some old world idiom into literary English." And again, Corson's remarks: "She herself told me that she wrote them down as they appeared in her eyes on another plane of objective existence, that she clearly saw the page of the book and the quotation she needed and simply translated what she saw into English. The hundreds of books she quoted were certainly not in my library, many of them not in America, some of them very rare and difficult to get in Europe. And he says these were marvelous facts that she quoted from these books. And she stays there for a couple weeks and then goes back to New York, and she's working with Olcott on ISIS. Olcott reports that when continuing the work on ISIS, Blavatsky did use books whenever available. As to the rest, she drew from the astral light or from her adept teachers. And HPB says to Olcott in this quote, "One day in the summer of 1875, HPB showed me some sheets of manuscript she had written and said, 'I wrote this last night by order.'" So she was in close proximity to the masters, and she wrote things by their order and as given to her by them. And the rest of it she could access on the astral light. And we know that that is the electromagnetic tablet, and everything is reserved in it if we know how to access it. And once in New York, the work on ISIS accelerated. She wrote to her aunt and says, "I work 17 hours a day and live on oatmeal." 17 hours a day she worked on ISIS Unveiled to write it and give it out. So it is written in a very unusual way. There is no secret about it. She's very open about it, because there is an article called "My Works," and she criticizes ISIS Unveiled in that work. And I'm not sure what I've done with it. I had a copy of it. It's in here, and it's not there. I didn't bring it. No? I did not bring it. Okay. Okay. She criticizes it. She says that she wrote it and also listened to the people who helped her with it. We have to also remember that when she came in 1873 to the United States, even though she had learned the English language as a child in Russia, she could not speak it. She understood it if she saw it written, but she couldn't say many things. For such an eloquent work to be produced in such a short time by someone who didn't speak the English language, it is very natural that she got help. She never denies it. And Corson is one of them, and there are others listed on that sheet where she criticizes her works. And the publisher is also responsible at that time. She said that they kind of owned her work, that when she found out the misspellings and misquotations, because the typeset was already done, she couldn't change it. And when she appealed to the publisher to please correct these errors, the publisher sent her a bill because they had to redo the typeset to correct it. And so she said she didn't have the money, so the corrections were never put in place. So the book has a section in the front where all of the misquotations are corrected because she did it herself, and it's available in that book. These two books, ISIS Unveiled and secret doctrine go together. The information contained in Isis Unveiled is not in the secret doctrine. So they need to be corroborated because electricity and magnetism is covered in Isis Unveiled, and we will come to that as to why it is so important to know it. Now, since we have talked about how it was written, why it was written, now we will go into details as to what was revealed. And as we said, the key was turned only once in Isis Unveiled, and she turns the key again in the secret doctrine. So they go together. One without the other has no value. Let us see what she tells us in Isis Unveiled. She says, all of these works that she produced was written under direct orders from the masters with their help and with other help given to her by Olcott, later on Mr. Judge, and so forth. So, remembering that, she gives us in Isis Unveiled certain statements that are very important because it was never said before. She tells us men existed. Well, how did we exist? She gives humanity a tremendous antiquity, and to this day, science is not is moving in that direction, but hasn't reached that far back. We know that man is everywhere existent, because without men no progress can be had, because it is necessary to have that spiritual force there. Excuse me, my nose is dripping. And she's giving us evidence as to the Hermetic or the wisdom religion being so very vast and being archaic, because it's the root. We said the underlying value of the book for the open-minded searcher is the underlying unity, because once you go and read it and do examine what she has given, it is evident, you cannot deny the conclusion you yourself come to, that unity is there. In order to understand the natural laws and the corresponding principles all meant to these, she says we will elucidate these principles. There is no miracle. That's the first thing she gives. There is no miracle. Because when you go to the religious books, there's all kinds of miracles. She says there is no miracle. Everything that happens is the result of law. Eternal, immutable, ever active. Well, if we see things that looks like miracles to us, it's because we do not understand the law behind it. That's why it looks like a miracle. 2, nature is triune. Well, we know this already because we're engrossed into the works. Nature is threefold. There is the physical. The universe has a physical body, just like the human being. It has a physical body. It has an inner, vitalizing, energic principle, active, energic principle. It's electromagnetic. The earth has that, right? And then there is the supreme or the spirit above all, because without that essence, nothing else can exist. Man follow the same pattern. We're also triune. We have a physical body, we have an inner astral body, which is the electromagnetic copy that the body is built on. It's not the other way around. The electromagnetic is there, and then the body is built on it, and then we have the Supreme Spirit above that. The Spirit, then, is the source of all forces in the universe. The Spirit is the source of all forces. The first two principles change, but the last third never does. So, when a human being, while in the body, is able to merge himself with the immortal spirit, he has become an immortal entity. This opportunity then exists for every human soul. 4. Magic as a science is the knowledge of these principles and of the way by which the spirit shows its control over nature's forces and may be acquired by the human being still in the body. Magic as an art is the application of this knowledge in practice. Arcane knowledge, this wisdom religion, misapplied, is sorcery. When beneficently used, it is wisdom, true magic. Then she addresses mediumship, opposite to adeptship. The medium is a passive instrument, allows the foreign influences to come through her or into her. The adept actively controls himself and all inferior potencies around him. And then she goes to show that the adept, by using his inner powers, can obtain anything that's in the astral light, because we have 7 principles and we function on those, whether we know it or not. But the adept objectively functions on those levels of existence. They know what they are doing, they're conscious. Some of the magical skills is voluntary and conscious withdrawal of the inner man from the outer man can happen. In cases of the mediums, this withdrawal occurs, but it is unconscious and involuntary. They're passive. They're just allowing the influence or the force to pass through them. Whereas the adept controls this separation. They're in charge of it. In other words, they know what they are doing. The cornerstone of magic is an intimate, practical knowledge of magnetism and electricity, their qualities, correlations, and potencies. Especially necessary excuse me, is a familiarity with their effects in and upon the animal kingdom and men. There are occult properties in many minerals and plants also, and in the olden days, these were known. The archaic knowledge had its practical application in ages past because our forefathers understood the laws of nature and they became practitioners of this occult knowledge for the beneficence of others. Because if it is malignant purposes that we're using it for, it becomes sorcery. To sum up all in a few words, we're told, magic is a spiritual wisdom. The nature, the material ally, pupil, and servant of the magician. One common vital principle pervades all things, and this is controllable by the perfected human will. We talked earlier how by effecting that we become immortal. So we will stop here and open it for comments and questions. Yes?
Did she have other records of her her followers, her students? Like, do they have like testimonials, people who were under her as students or just as?
Some of them. Some of them are referred to in the Theosophical Movement articles to show us how things did not work as planned by the masters because human personalities interfered with it. Because we all are personalities, but that is who this appearance takes. But that's not who I am. If we understand that we are internally individualities, in other words, the soul, higher mind, and the spirit go from life to life, that it is immortal, perhaps we would act differently from the perspective of the higher. Everywhere we're told to be altruistic, right? But in her time, remember, she is slowly bringing this knowledge out. She has to write it, right? She has Lucifer, the magazine Lucifer, and she said that this was an excellent source where she could directly get into contact with the students who were interested in learning her philosophy. But the names are not divulged. They're secret. The Lodge of the Adepts exists, but we don't know who they are, do we?
Perhaps that one day will be unveiled.
Well, she wrote a book. She wrote the ones that were mentioned, her masterworks, but she had 2 other volumes that she had completed. The third one, adjunct to the secret doctrine, was the tracing of the adepts worldwide. She wanted to show us who came where and what portion of the wisdom religion was given out. But she said the releasing of those 4 books were dependent on how what she gave out was received and used. We said earlier that the adepts are like teachers in a way. Just like, for instance, in a school setting or at home, the mother decides how much to give her children so as not to confuse them, to mislead them, or overwhelm them. The masters apply the same thing. They give us only as much as we can absorb. They don't want to overwhelm us, confuse us, mislead us, none of that. So only portions of it are given. But if you historically go backwards to the beginning of the 2,000 years, as she gathered this information for us in ISIS and then later on in the Secret Doctrine, you can trace the beginnings of where it was and how it was distributed, because there's only one underlying principle of everything. So that this wisdom is distributed under law. The masters work under law because they are that law. They accompany that law within themselves. They will not forfeit it. So they give it out as humanity can absorb, and the 1875 to 91 was such a period of this concentrated effort given to the world, because the mind of the race at that time was ready to receive it. Before, they couldn't make an indentation in it. It was closed. But as it was moving towards the end of the 19th century, they brought this philosophy out to give humanity a different perspective at looking at world religions and the limitations of science, because everything in science is based on what is visible. And we know from this philosophy she gave, because she got information for her book from the astral tablets that are preserved, that information is available to us, but what does it require? First, that we not be selfish. We're not using it for ourselves. You cannot take it and use it for yourself. Two, that you're getting it to enlighten humanity. You're going to give it out as a gift to humanity. And thirdly, you're working under law. What you can get out of it is dependent on how pure and unselfish and developed you are yourself. So her students were known to her, but not to the outer world. But some of them were known because they were prominent representatives of the movement at that time. But if you go and study it, the movement, and no human being has the right to condemn another human being. We do all have personalities. Our defects are in the lower aspect of us. The higher is perfect. What needs to happen is that we look at the stuff with a critical eye, not to condemn the other person, but if they made a mistake, to learn from it and not repeat it. As an example, they give certain names, but not to criticize or condemn them, but to show the error in the behavior of that person. Mr. Judge was her student and her colleague. Annie Besant was another one. Alpert was another one. Yeah. She instructed.
In the dialogues, would there be some mention there too? The Secret Doctrine dialogues.
Have you read any?
Yeah.
Okay, then make a comment.
Well, I just wanted to make a mention that in that book, in the Secret Doctrine dialogues, there's exchanges back and forth in the early days
Yes.
between HPB and the various students who were there with her.
Correct.
And this student found it very valuable because first she comes across as a fellow human being, and as brilliant as things that came out through her, she sort of this exposed her human vulnerabilities and her inner strength all at the same time.
Correct. Yes. This book that was
Right behind
out,
you. Right further behind you.
further behind
Straight behind you, yeah. The dialogues.
This one here.
No, to the right. Very right,
This one.
yeah.
This book here, at the end, has a section in it where HPB is teaching her students, both externally and occultly. The occult is not here, but the external is in here, and all of the names are listed. Kitely, Hall, Kitely, Kingsland, Mead, Cobb, so forth. You can find for yourself. This student does not go to that kind of detail.
Yeah.
It's the philosophy that's
Right,
important,
right,
the absorption of the philosophy. In this work, there's a tremendous difference between this work, this compilation of this philosophy, and all the other works. And the reason it is stated is this. She didn't just write it to give information. She wrote it in such a way that the curious-minded that wanted to get at the information had to develop their intuition. You cannot get at this by reason alone. You need your intuition. Reason has to be used appropriately. We reason things out. If it doesn't sit with my common sense, then I reject it for the time being. Okay? has my common sense and my reason. Well, we use it all the time. You just don't, just because it is given, it doesn't mean I have to accept it. I have to put it to my own judgment, discriminative powers, reasoning powers. But this is what is intuition. Without the intuition part, which is part of the higher mind, this philosophy cannot be made your own. There are layers and layers of understanding in this book. She says there are 7 keys. She turned 1. So there's a lot of stuff underneath what is being said, but first you have to get familiar as to what it contains and what it means. Without that, you cannot go deeper into it. That is why this student sits in the corner in the living room and reads these books, because it is so valuable to the enlargement of the thinking principle. It's amazing what you get out of it eventually if you stay with it, but you have to stay with it. And this student does not find it difficult. I have the dictionary right by my side, and if there's a word I'm not familiar with, I look it up. It's not a big deal, and I write the meaning next to it, and next time it's right there, and I don't have to look it up again. A lot of people object to the books because it is old-fashioned, but its value is because it came from the masters. It's a direct source of information they gave out into the world, and I think it would lose its value if it was altered.
Is that the glossary?
It has a glossary.
The green book?
It has a glossary. But there is a little bit something I came across here, which I will read to you. It says here, without this work, her mission and her theosophy cannot be understood. Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine are integral. Both are parts of one stupendous whole. To the extent that they are neglected, that the attention of students and inquirers is diverted to interpretations, substitutions, and the many misguided and ambitious later attempts to embellish and improve upon the recorded theosophy of H.P. Blavatsky, just to that extent with the philanthropy of her masters and herself, have been abused and betrayed by its recipients. We didn't write it. We don't have any right to change it. It is the birthright of every human being to find this information as it was given by the masters in its pure form, because it imparts intuition. If you constantly are engaged in understanding it, it opens your intuitive powers. But everything has to be intact in order for that to happen, because the key is in it. The key. If you change the words, the key does not have the significance. Its key does not have the significance anymore. And those who understand the value of this work will study it. Electricity and magnetism is extremely important to understand, because we are electromagnetic. The inner vital aspect of us is electromagnetic, just as the universe is. So are we. And if we are going to etherealize as is given to us eventually, then it is necessary to understand it, because we're going to function on those fields of operation. And those who know how to do it will go on, and those who refuse to learn will not do so. That's just nature.
Just a comment. This student has observed that much that's in the ISIS and also the secret doctrine was not accepted, like you said, by science at that time. But much of that has come out since then. But there's quite a bit more in there that I guess science is working on to this day. So it's sort of a blueprint for the future, as well as kind of showing you what has happened in the last 100 years or so.
She has has a very poignant statement, and I would like to read it to you. This actually addresses the first object of the theosophical movement. She says, deeply sensible of the titanic struggle that is now in progress between materialism and the spiritual aspirations of mankind, our constant endeavor has been to gather into our several chapters, like weapons into armories, every fact and argument that can be used to aid the latter in defeating the former. The materialism of today is born of the brutal yesterday. Unless its growth is arrested, it may become our master.
It seems like it has to a degree now.
We must show our false theologies in their naked deformity and distinguish between divine religion and human dogmas. Our voice is raised for spiritual freedom, and our plea made for enfranchisement from all tyranny, whether of science or theology. So, she's appealing to our higher nature here. She wants us to understand what is at stake, because she says if we don't overcome materialism, it's going to be our master. Where is our society today? The spirituality is not religiosity. The spirituality
It's not really
is
what?
development of the inner nature. Each human being responsible for the outcome of that effort. It is the responsibility of each one of us to help the other, because brotherhood necessitates that. But by the same token, one cannot do the work of the other. That each one must do their work themselves. And it shows its necessity. In understanding this philosophy, we put it in. And it has a way of coming out with its own volition. And this is the difference between this philosophy and all the other philosophies. Once we have made it our own, then we can live it. We have to live the life if we want to know what's in these books. Just words and paying homage to the words will not carry the day. This philosophy has to be understood, amalgamated, digested, and then given to humanity as a living example by those who practice its tenets. A living example. It has to become alive in us, and we have to become exemplars of the philosophy in our universe. What happens then? Humanity then expresses its human tendencies. Love, affection, kindness, generosity, equality, all those would be naturally evident around us if all of us were to practice not all of its tenets, but at least some of its tenets, because we are all one. This philosophy brings out the unity of humanity based on a spiritual essence. We are all one. It's not a word, it's a reality of nature. And she tells us in the same book that psychology in the West lack principles. That we need to, she says, the West needs to go to the East and ask the Brahmin and Lamaists of the Orient respectfully to impart the alphabet of this true science to them. Why is that? Well, it is very obvious to this student, we're not the physical body. This is just the cover. It's a tremendously important part of it, in the sense that it has to be kept clean and in order, because we need a vehicle to shine this light through. It's very obvious. But we have other principles. 7 keys, we're 7 principled human beings. So it is necessary that we keep each principle in order. To understand those principles, then we need to go to the East, because they have that psychology being practiced there. They are not just dependent on what is visible, but they also have learned to work with the invisible. They have all these 6 or 7 levels available to them. Our science is still persisting that we're just physical. But the intuitive ones are kind of moving in that direction, where before they used to say it was an empty universe, now they say it's a full universe. Well, what is it? It's neither full or empty, it's both. If it is empty when your eye cannot see it, but if the inner eye is open and can see what's in the environment, it's full. There are, she says there are 4 other classes of denizens that occupy our universe, and she calls them the elementals of, it's not in this one, but I'm putting it up here. Elementals of earth, water, air, fire. Gnomes, undines, silts, and salamanders are the ones that, the names of those. Thank you. If you have no other questions, then thank you for coming.
Just a comment, the end of next month will be a continuation of the topics of the
The
Masterworks.
Masterworks.
And all of our talks at UOT are based on these Masterworks in some form or fashion, an aspect of them. So thank you for joining us. Next week will be on Easter, the symbology of Easter. Thank you.